"Get out of this house. You don't belong here anymore." My daughter-in-law's scream echoed through the walls of the very home I had built with decades of sacrifice. I froze, clutching the edge of the table, my heart pounding as the words cut into me deeper than any knife. It wasn't just her voice, it was the sight of my husband standing behind her, silent, eyes avoiding mine. The truth had been clear for weeks, but that moment carved it into stone. They were together, my own husband and the woman who had married my son. I didn't scream back. I didn't argue. Instead, I walked slowly to my room, each step heavier than the last, and began to pack the few things that still felt like mine. Family photos, a necklace my mother gave me, and the worn sweater I always reached for on cold nights. I placed them carefully into a small suitcase, while their laughter drifted faintly down the hallway. As I zipped the bag shut, my mind was spinning, not just with betrayal but with disbelief at how easily they dismissed me, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. When I opened the door to leave, my daughter-in-law smirked, arms crossed, certain she had won. My husband still wouldn't look at me. I walked past them in silence, holding on to the little dignity I had left. I didn't know then that this quiet exit would be the beginning of their downfall. If you were standing in my shoes, betrayed by both your husband and daughter-in-law, would you shout back or walk away in silence like I did? Leave a comment and tell me what you would do. When people look at an old woman with a suitcase in her hand, they rarely imagine the life hidden behind the wrinkles and the tired eyes. But every line on my face tells a story of sacrifice. Long before my daughter-in-law walked into our lives and poisoned it, I was a wife and a mother who believed in the simple promise that family meant forever. I met my husband when I was 22. He was charming, ambitious, and made me laugh in ways no one else ever had. We didn't have much when we started. I remember nights when we split a can of soup between us, and mornings when I stitched my only pair of stockings so I could wear them one more day to work. But we built our lives brick by brick. I gave up my own dreams of becoming a teacher so I could support his career and raise our son. I never complained, not when the bills piled up, not when my body ached from cleaning houses to make ends meet, and not when I stayed awake alone at night while he traveled for work. Our son was my treasure. Every scraped knee, every report card, every graduation photo I was there, cheering, sewing costumes, baking cookies for school events. I poured myself into motherhood because that was what gave me meaning. And when my son fell in love, I wanted nothing more than to welcome his bride with open arms. At first, she seemed perfect. Polite smiles, sweet words, always eager to help. She praised me in front of others, told neighbors how lucky she was to marry into such a caring family. I believed her. I believed every word. But slowly, her mask slipped. She began to rearrange things in my home without asking first the furniture, then the rules. My recipes were too old-fashioned. My traditions too outdated. She rolled her eyes when I said grace before meals, smirked when I reminded my son to call his grandmother. It wasn't just small things. She began inserting herself into financial matters, insisting she could manage better. She convinced my husband to put her name on accounts, persuaded my son to let her handle the bills. When I asked simple questions, she snapped that it was none of my business. My own son, the boy I raised, started to defend her sharp words instead of my trembling ones. I tried to convince myself it was just the clash of generations, that she would soften with time. I swallowed my hurt, telling myself that peace was worth more than pride. But every compromise I made only seemed to fuel her hunger for control. Soon, she was dictating what we ate, how the house was decorated, even how holidays were celebrated. She insisted on expensive dinners at restaurants instead of the family meals I cooked. She scoffed at my handmade gifts, calling them cheap. The woman who once flattered me now mocked me behind closed doors. I heard her once on the phone telling a friend, "She's just an old woman clinging to her place in a house that's no longer hers." My chest tightened hearing it, but I stayed silent. For my son, always for my son. And then came the subtle isolation. She scheduled outings with my husband without including me. They whispered together in corners, exchanged glances I couldn't read. When I tried to join conversations, she steered them away, making me feel invisible. Slowly, I realized my husband wasn't resisting her influence, he was encouraging it. Still, I clung to hope. I thought maybe time would heal whatever resentment she carried toward me. I baked her favorite desserts, left kind notes by her bedside, offered to help with her laundry. Each gesture was met with coldness, or worse, ridicule. She mocked my handwriting once, laughing that it looked like an old woman scribbling prescriptions. My husband chuckled along with her, and I excused myself to cry in the bathroom. The weight of betrayal doesn't crash all at once. It builds slowly, like a roof leaking one drop at a time until the ceiling caves in. Looking back, the signs were there, but I chose not to see them. I told myself I could endure, that it was better to live quietly in the corners of my own home than to tear the family apart. But family doesn't mean what it used to. My daughter-in-law saw me not as family, but as an obstacle. And my husband, the man I sacrificed everything for, had begun to look at me with the same dismissive eyes. It's strange, isn't it? You can spend decades giving your life to someone, only to realize too late that loyalty isn't always repaid. I thought my silence was a form of strength. I thought enduring would protect my son. Instead, it only gave her room to grow bolder, crueler, more entitled. And one day, she decided it wasn't enough to push me into the background. She wanted me gone. Do you think I was right to stay silent for so long, hoping to protect my son? Or should I have confronted her the moment she showed her true colors? Share your thoughts. I want to know what you would have done. The night I discovered the truth wasn't a dramatic soap opera scene with shouting and glass shattering. It was worse. It was quiet. Too quiet. I had returned home earlier than expected from visiting a friend. The house was dim, the curtains drawn, though I was sure no one had planned to be away. I set my purse down, thinking maybe they had stepped out, when I heard the faintest sound from upstairs: laughter, hushed voices, and then a door creaking open. I moved toward the staircase, my body trembling without understanding why. Halfway up, I froze. I could hear them clearly. Her voice, his voice, words I can never erase. "I can't believe she still hangs around," my daughter-in-law whispered, followed by my husband's low chuckle. "Don't worry," he murmured. "Soon she won't be a problem." Then a sound, a kiss, unmistakable, shattering what was left of my illusions. I wanted to scream, to storm in and drag them both into the light of their betrayal, but I couldn't move. My legs shook, my throat locked, my hands gripped the banister until my knuckles turned white. The man I had devoted my life to, the woman my son had married together. My entire body felt hollow. I staggered back down the stairs before they could notice me, collapsing into a chair in the kitchen. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the floor tiles, the same ones I had scrubbed countless times to keep the home spotless. I couldn't even bring myself to wipe my face. I sat there, a ghost in my own life, while upstairs they laughed in the darkness. When they finally came down, their shock at finding me sitting there melted quickly into something crueler: defiance. She strutted past me as if she owned the place, hair tousled, eyes glittering with arrogance. My husband avoided my gaze at first, but when I finally managed to whisper, "How could you?" he smirked faintly, as though the question amused him. It was my daughter-in-law who delivered the final blow. She planted herself in front of me, hands on hips, and sneered. "You're pathetic. Look at you. Old, weak, clinging to a life that doesn't want you. Get out of this house, tonight." Her words rang like a judge's sentence. My husband said nothing. His silence was worse than any insult. He stood behind her, not even pretending to defend me. I wanted to shout back, to claw at her smug face, to demand that he look me in the eye. But the weight of years pressed me down. Every insult I had swallowed, every sacrifice I had made, every night I had stayed quiet, it all crashed down in that single moment. And I realized something terrifying. They wanted me to explode. They wanted me to scream and break so they could call me crazy, dismiss me entirely. So I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I stood up slowly, my body trembling but my voice steady. I said nothing. I walked past them, ignoring the venom in her eyes, the cowardice in his. I made my way to my room and began to pack. Not in a frenzy, not in panic, deliberately, carefully. I folded clothes, placed them in my suitcase, tucked in the photographs and heirlooms I had saved since before she even knew our family existed. Every item I packed reminded me of who I truly was, and that truth was stronger than their betrayal. She knocked once on my door, mocking me. "Need help with your little bags?" she asked sweetly. I ignored her. My husband's voice followed, quieter but just as cruel. "You brought this on yourself. That was all. No apology, no regret. just blame. I zipped my suitcase shut, lifted it, and walked out. The house felt different already, as if it belonged to strangers. They stood at the bottom of the stairs, united in their betrayal, watching me like vultures circling prey. My daughter-in-law smirked again, whispering something into his ear that made him chuckle. The sight of them together burned into my memory like acid. But as I reached the front door, a strange calm washed over me. I turned the knob, stepped outside, and felt the cool night air against my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't suffocating inside that house. I was free, humiliated, yes, heartbroken beyond words, but free. They thought they had won. They thought my silence was weakness, my departure a surrender. What they didn't know was that silence can be a weapon, and sometimes walking away is the first step toward victory. As I pulled the suitcase down the path, I looked back once at the glowing windows. My home, stolen from me by greed and betrayal. I clenched my jaw, promising myself that this was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning. I spent that first night in a small motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and paper-thin walls. The sheets smelled faintly of bleach, the heater rattled, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed everything: the laughter upstairs, her mocking smirk, his silence. Betrayal is heavy, heavier than any suitcase. It presses on your chest until you can barely breathe. But in that suffocating silence, I remembered something. Years ago, when my son was still in college, my husband had insisted we set up a trust. At the time, he said it was to protect the family's future. I had signed the papers, never questioning his motives, because I trusted him. What he didn't know was that I kept a copy tucked away in a locked box, separate from his reach, because I believed one day I might need proof of my contributions. That thought became my lifeline. The next morning, I unlocked that little box at a storage unit I had been paying for quietly over the years. Inside, the faded folder still held every legal document, pages of signatures, clauses, and the fine print my husband had always waved away. I ran my fingers over the pages, tears stinging my eyes, until I found the name of an old friend of his, Harold Jenkins, the lawyer who had drafted the trust. I dialed his office number, unsure if he would even remember me. But when his secretary answered and put me through, Harold's familiar, steady voice came on the line. "Margaret? Good heavens, it's been years. What's going on?" I hesitated only for a moment before the words tumbled out. "Harold, I need to know if the trust is still valid, and I need to know exactly what it means for me." He grew quiet, listening as I explained everything: my husband, my daughter-in-law, the affair, the night I was thrown out. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he said firmly, "Come to my office. Today. Bring the documents. Don't say a word to them until you've spoken with me." Sitting across from Harold that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: strength. He spread the papers across his desk, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. After a long silence, he looked up with eyes that carried both pity and resolve. "Margaret, this trust is ironclad. Your husband thought he was securing his own power, but in reality, these clauses give you more control than either of them realizes. Legally, the house, the accounts tied to the trust, even certain assets he's been using, they're safeguarded under your authority." I blinked at him, stunned. "So, they don't know?" He shook his head. "Number, and if they're acting as recklessly as you say, it's only a matter of time before their arrogance pushes them into a corner. But you must be careful. Don't confront them now. Let me handle the paperwork, and when the time comes, we'll bring everything to light properly." For the first time since I walked out of my home, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of resolve. They thought they had buried me. They thought silence meant defeat. But Harold's words lit a spark inside me. I wasn't done. Not even close. The following weeks were difficult. I rented a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but enough for me to live quietly. I cooked simple meals, kept myself busy with knitting and walks through the park, and each night I waited for Harold's calls. He updated me on the filings, the preparations, the dates we would need to meet. Every phone call reminded me that my patience would be rewarded. Meanwhile, rumors drifted back to me through neighbors. My daughter-in-law had practically moved into my role in the household, parading herself as the new matriarch. She hosted dinners, redecorated, even boasted about her influence. People whispered about how my husband seemed younger by her side, though most eyes carried judgment rather than admiration. She thrived on the attention, convinced she had secured her place. What she didn't know was that every step she took deeper into arrogance only made the eventual fall more devastating. Harold warned me, her greed will be her undoing. Let her keep digging her own grave. I stayed silent. I didn't storm the house, didn't call out their betrayal in public. My silence was my shield, my weapon. I learned to wear it like armor. At night, I would sit by my small kitchen window, looking at the city lights, whispering to myself, patience, just a little longer. There were moments when loneliness threatened to crush me. I missed my son desperately, though I knew he was caught in the middle, perhaps blind to the poison seeping through our family. I longed to hear his voice, but Harold advised against reaching out. We need the element of surprise, he insisted. Once the legal papers are revealed, then he'll see the truth for himself. So I waited. And every day that passed, I grew stronger. My daughter-in-law thought she had silenced me. My husband thought his betrayal had broken me. But in truth, I was sharpening my resolve, preparing for the moment when their laughter would turn into screams of denial. The night I left, they believed the story was over. They were wrong. The real story was only beginning, and soon the lawyer would arrive to show them just how wrong they had been. Do you think my silence was the right weapon against them? Or would you have confronted them immediately with the lawyer by your side? Share your answer. I want to hear how you would fight back. The day of reckoning didn't arrive with thunder or lightning. It came with the steady voice of a lawyer and the rustle of papers pulled from a leather briefcase. Harold called me 2 weeks after we first met, his tone firm but measured. It's time, he said. I've scheduled a meeting at the house. I want you there. My heart pounded at the thought of stepping back into the place I had been driven from like an intruder. But I knew this wasn't about fear anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity. When I arrived, suitcase in hand once again, my daughter-in-law was already at the table, her posture casual, a smug smile dancing at the corner of her lips. My husband sat beside her, looking uncomfortable but trying to mimic her confidence. The two of them radiated entitlement, as if they had already claimed victory. Harold entered behind me, his presence commanding the room without needing to raise his voice. He shook hands curtly with my husband, nodded politely at my daughter-in-law, and then sat down, opening his briefcase with deliberate care. The sound of the metal clasp snapping open made my daughter-in-law's smirk falter for the briefest moment. Thank you all for coming, Harold began. I'm here to review certain matters regarding the Sullivan Trust and related assets. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, her voice syrupy sweet. Oh, that's wonderful. We were just discussing how to streamline everything now that the old arrangements are outdated. Harold raised an eyebrow. Outdated? That's an interesting choice of words. Because as far as the law is concerned, the arrangements are still very much alive and binding. A flicker of confusion passed across her face, but she quickly masked it with another smile. Of course, we just assumed. You assumed wrong, Harold interrupted smoothly. He pulled out a thick folder, slid it across the table, and tapped the first page. This trust, signed and sealed decades ago, dictates that control over the primary residence, the investment accounts, and several business interests lies not with Mr. Sullivan, nor with any spouse by marriage after its creation, but with Margaret Sullivan. The room went still. My husband shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me for the first time in weeks. My daughter-in-law's smile froze, her lips twitching as if the muscles had forgotten how to work. That can't be right, she said finally, her voice sharp. He's the man of the house. Everything is in his name. Harold's tone didn't change, calm as a surgeon's hand. Actually, no. That's where you're mistaken. While Mr. Sullivan's name appears on certain accounts, the trust designates Margaret as the trustee with final authority, which means that without her consent, no sale, transfer, or reallocation of assets can occur. None. Not the house, not the accounts, not the investments. She blinked rapidly, then turned to my husband. Tell him that's ridiculous. Tell him. But my husband's face had turned pale. He cleared his throat, muttered, Harold, are you sure? Harold cut him off. I drafted it myself, Robert. Do you really want to argue with the man who wrote the contract you signed? Silence fell heavy. My daughter-in-law's fingers tapped nervously on the table. She tried again. louder this time. Well, even if that's true, surely as his wife, I have rights. No, Harold said flatly. You married into this family long after the trust was established. You were never included, never named, never considered. Legally, you are entitled to nothing from these assets. Her face reddened. Nothing? After everything I've done? I almost laughed, though my chest ached with the weight of years. Everything she had done, destroying my marriage, mocking my traditions, stealing my home. My hands clenched in my lap, but I remained silent, letting Harold's words slice through her arrogance like a blade. She turned her anger on me next. This is your doing. You're manipulating this old man, trying to cling to power you don't deserve. I lifted my chin. My voice was calm, steady, not the trembling whisper she had grown accustomed to. Number, this isn't manipulation. This is truth. The truth you never bothered to learn before trying to take everything from me. Her eyes widened, as if she hadn't expected me to speak at all. My husband fidgeted beside her, sweat beading at his temples. For once, he had no words, no defense. Harold closed the folder with a snap. From this day forward, any attempts to access or transfer funds without Margaret's explicit approval will be considered fraud, and I assure you, I will pursue it legally. Do I make myself clear? The authority in his tone left no room for argument. My daughter-in-law's mouth opened, then shut again. She looked at my husband, waiting for him to rescue her, but his shoulders sagged under the weight of his own shame. I leaned forward, finally allowing myself a small smile. You told me to get out of this house, but it turns out it was never yours to claim in the first place. Her jaw tightened, her nails digging into her palms. For the first time, the confidence drained from her eyes, replaced by panic. Harold stood, gathering his papers. That concludes today's review. Margaret, I'll follow up with additional documentation for your records. Robert, I advise you to tread carefully. And as for you, he glanced at my daughter-in-law, his gaze cold. I suggest you reconsider your position before making demands that hold no legal ground. The meeting ended with the scrape of chairs and the sound of my daughter-in-law storming out, muttering under her breath. My husband lingered, but he didn't meet my eyes. He simply walked away, shoulders hunched, a man stripped of authority. When the door closed behind them, Harold placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You see, silence wasn't weakness, it was patience, and now, the power is yours. I nodded, a mixture of relief and sorrow washing over me. I had lost so much trust, love, the family I thought I knew, but I had regained something even more important, my voice. What do you think my daughter-in-law will do next? Beg for forgiveness, lash out in rage, or scheme another way to grab what was never hers? Share your prediction in the comments. Dinner had always been sacred in our home. For decades, the dining table was where birthdays were celebrated, prayers were whispered, and secrets were shared. But that evening, the same oak table became a courtroom. And the jury? Our fractured family. I arrived quietly, escorted by Harold, who insisted on attending. My son sat at the head of the table, looking weary and uncertain. He had called the meeting after hearing fragments of gossip about the confrontation with Harold. My husband was already there, stiff and defensive. And my daughter-in-law, well, she had dressed the part of the aggrieved queen, dripping in jewelry, her chin tilted high. The meal sat untouched in the center of the table. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, all growing cold as the tension thickened. My son cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. We need to talk about what's happening. I'm hearing different stories, and I want the truth. End quote. My daughter-in-law leaned forward immediately, seizing control. The truth? The truth is your mother is trying to destroy our marriage. She's manipulating lawyers, twisting documents, making herself look like the victim when she's the one pulling the strings. I inhaled sharply, but before I could speak, Harold placed a calm hand on my arm. Let her finish, he whispered. She went on, her voice rising with each word. She's jealous. She can't stand that you and your father moved on without her. She wants to control everything, even though she's old and bitter. She's poisoning this family. My son frowned, glancing at me, then back at her. Mom? I finally spoke, my tone steady. I didn't poison this family. I gave my life to it. What's poisoning us is betrayal. I turned my gaze deliberately toward my husband, then back to her. You wanted me gone because you thought I had no power left. But the trust proves otherwise. You never had a claim to this house, or these assets. Not then, not now. The words landed like a gavel striking wood. She slammed her hand on the table, silver bracelets clinking. That's not fair. I've invested my time, my energy. I've been the one keeping this house together while she sulked in the background. Harold's voice cut through her theatrics like a blade. Legally, you've invested nothing. You've contributed nothing that entitles you to ownership. And as for keeping the house together, perhaps you should consider how much damage your choices have caused instead. Her eyes blazed. You're taking her side. Harold adjusted his glasses. I'm taking the side of the law. My husband finally spoke, his voice strained. Enough of this. Margaret, don't drag our dirty laundry in front of everyone. We can settle this privately. I turned to him. Decades of pain crystallizing in my words. Privately? You mean the way you settled it in the dark, behind closed doors with her? My voice cracked, but I pressed on. You betrayed me with my own daughter-in-law. Don't you dare talk about privacy. The silence that followed was suffocating. My son's eyes widened, horror dawning across his face as the truth slammed into him. Dad, is that true? My husband opened his mouth, then closed it again, his silence louder than any confession. My son shoved his chair back, his face pale. I can't believe this. You both of you? You did this to Mom? My daughter-in-law stammered, reaching for him. It wasn't like that. She's twisting things. It was complicated. But my son recoiled from her touch as though it burned. Complicated? You slept with my father, and then you had the audacity to throw my mother out of her own home? The room erupted into overlapping voices, her shrill denials, my husband's desperate pleas, my son's angry questions. It felt like chaos, but to me, it was clarity. The lies were unraveling at last. I raised my hand, commanding silence. This is no longer about my pain. This is about truth. And the truth is this. You, my dear daughter-in-law, thought arrogance could rewrite the law. You thought betrayal could erase decades of sacrifice. You thought I would stay silent forever. But tonight, you face the consequences of your actions. Her face crumpled, fury and fear warring in her eyes. For the first time, she looked small, cornered. My son's voice shook with emotion. I need time to process this. But know this, what you've done to my mother is unforgivable. She reached for him again, desperate now. Please, you don't understand. But he pushed his chair back further, shaking his head. I looked around the table at the family I once believed unbreakable, now shattered by greed and betrayal. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the victim. I felt like the judge. The storm didn't pass after my son's words. It only grew louder. My daughter-in-law's mask of confidence cracked completely, leaving behind a desperate woman clawing for control she never truly had. She stood from the table, her voice rising, shrill with panic. This isn't fair. I've been the one taking care of this family while she sat back doing nothing. I deserve a share. I deserve something. I remained seated, calm, watching her unravel. Harold leaned back slightly, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. Deserve and entitled are not the same. You may feel deserving, but the law does not recognize feelings. It recognizes documents, and every document we have says the same thing. You are owed nothing. Her fists clenched, tears springing to her eyes. She turned to my husband, desperate. Robert, say something. Tell them this is wrong. Tell them she's manipulating everyone. But my husband looked defeated, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the truth. He rubbed his temples, muttered. What do you want me to say? It's all there, in black and white. Harold wouldn't lie. She let out a strangled laugh, half crazed. So that's it? After everything, you're just going to side with her? The woman who's been dragging this family down for years? Finally, I spoke, my voice cutting through her chaos like a blade. Dragging this family down? I built this family. I held it together when money was scarce, when your husband was just a boy, when your so-called husband, I shot a look at Robert, was gone, chasing his ambitions. I sacrificed so you could have a life built on stability, and you repay me by betraying me in my own home. Her face twisted, anger flashing, but Harold pressed forward before she could respond. He pulled another folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Since you're insisting on fairness, let's talk facts. These are records of unauthorized withdrawals from joint accounts transactions that point directly to you, Mrs. Sullivan. She stiffened. That's a lie. Harold's voice remained steady. Bank statements don't lie. Every time Margaret questioned expenses, you dismissed her. But the truth is right here. You siphoned funds to your own accounts, used them for personal purchases, even luxury trips, all without consent. Gasps filled the room. My son's face drained of color as he leaned over the documents. Is this true? Her lips trembled, words catching in her throat. I was just trying to secure our future. I thought. You thought wrong, Harold cut in sharply. That's called misappropriation. And if Margaret chooses, she can pursue legal action against you for fraud. She collapsed back into her chair, her bravado gone, replaced by fear. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Don't do this. Don't ruin me. Evertine. I looked at her, truly looked at her, not as the arrogant woman who had mocked me, but as the hollow figure she had become. You ruined yourself the moment you betrayed this family. I don't need to lift a finger. Your actions speak louder than anything I could say. My husband finally raised his head, his voice low but bitter. You dragged me into this. I thought you cared about me. Her eyes widened, searching his face for sympathy, but found none. You used me, he continued, voice shaking. And now everything is falling apart. It was almost pitiful to watch, the two of them turning on each other like cornered animals. My son's disgust only deepened. He stood, pushing his chair back with a screech. I can't believe I let this go on under my nose. Mom, I'm so sorry. I reached out, touching his hand gently. You don't need to apologize. You were blinded by love and trust. But now you see. Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt the bond between us strengthen again. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law's voice broke into sobs. Please, Margaret, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Just don't take everything from me. I'll leave. I'll disappear. Just don't destroy me completely. Her pleas rang hollow. She wasn't sorry for the betrayal, only for the consequences. I rose slowly from my chair, gathering the documents Harold had left before me. This isn't about me destroying you. You've done that yourself. All I'm doing is reclaiming what was always mine. The room was silent except for her muffled sobs. My husband buried his face in his hands. My son stood tall, his expression hardened, no longer the boy caught in the middle but a man finally seeing the truth. I turned toward the doorway, my heart steady. This chapter is closed. Whatever happens next, you'll face it without me shielding you. And with that, I left the table, the oak table that had once been the heart of our family, but now stood as the witness to its unraveling. Do you think exposing their fraud and betrayal at the table was enough punishment? Or would you have taken the legal route to make sure they paid even more dearly? Share your verdict in the comments. When I stepped out of that dining room, I knew I was leaving more than just a meal behind. I was leaving behind decades of pain, betrayal, and silence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking into freedom. The air outside felt lighter, as if the house itself had been suffocating me for years. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night breeze wash over my face. My suitcase, which once felt like a symbol of exile, now felt like a badge of survival. I wasn't the woman they had tried to erase. I was the woman who had outlasted them. In the days that followed, I moved into a small cottage near the edge of town. It wasn't large or fancy, but it was mine. Every chair, every picture frame, every flower I planted in the garden reflected me, not the shadows of betrayal that had once haunted my steps. I painted the walls soft yellow, filled the shelves with books I had longed to read, and placed family photos in frames where I could look at them without shame. My mornings became rituals of peace. I brewed coffee in silence, sat by the window with the sun warming my face, and listened to birdsong instead of arguments. My afternoons were spent walking along quiet lanes, sometimes stopping to chat with neighbors who greeted me with kindness instead of judgment. At night, I lit candles, opened my journal, and wrote not about betrayal, but about dreams I had buried for far too long. Word spread quickly in town about what had happened. Some pitied me, others admired me. But the truth was, I didn't need their sympathy or their praise. I had already reclaimed what mattered most, my self-respect. As for my husband and my daughter-in-law, I rarely heard about them. Whispers drifted through the grapevine, that she had left in disgrace, that he had grown bitter and withdrawn, that their so-called partnership had collapsed under the weight of its own lies. Perhaps it was karma, perhaps it was simply justice. Either way, I no longer cared. Their downfall was no longer my concern. My son visited me one Sunday afternoon. He stood awkwardly in the doorway at first, carrying a bouquet of daisies, the same flowers he used to pick for me as a boy. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry for everything. I should have seen through them sooner." I embraced him, tears filling my eyes. "You see it now. That's what matters. We can start again." And we did. Over tea and laughter, we began stitching back the threads of a bond that betrayal had tried to sever. One evening, as I sat in my garden watching the sunset bleed across the horizon, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't been about destroying them. It had been about saving myself, about refusing to let their cruelty define me, about showing that silence is not surrender, it is strength waiting for the right moment. I thought back to the night my daughter-in-law screamed, "Get out of this house," and smiled. She had thought she was banishing me. In truth, she had freed me, because leaving gave me the chance to reclaim my life, not just my home. Now, every breath I take feels like a new beginning. I am not the same woman who once cowered in her own kitchen. I am not the woman who swallowed every insult just to keep the peace. I am Margaret Sullivan, a survivor, a mother, and a woman who found her voice when they tried hardest to silence it. This is not the end of my story. It is the rebirth of it. If you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal, what gave you strength to keep going? Share your story in the comments, I promise. Someone out there needs to hear it. And if you want more true family revenge stories like this one, don't forget to follow so you won't miss the next chapter.